Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Workplace AI webinar with SOAR Workplace AI and Chester Elton. I'm Chris Higbee, the Chief Product Officer for SOAR. Chester, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, yeah. Listen, first off, thanks for the invitation to talk about such an important issue. And yeah, my name's Chester Elton, along with my co-author, Adrian Gostick. We wrote the best-selling book, Anxiety at Work, 8 Strategies on How to Deal with Uncertainty and Ambiguity while Getting Stuff Done. Proud to be on the SOAR platform to help people deal with anxiety and really looking forward to the conversation. So thanks again for the invite.
Well, terrific. We're so grateful to have you here, Chester. And just to give a little bit of background, Chester is from the great land of the Great White North, lives in New Jersey, where he works all over the world, spreading the gospel of how to find greater peace at work. And I, for one, am really grateful for this book. It's something that I've read and have also shared with my family members. I can't wait to begin to implement it even more into my life. And with that, Chester, let me ask you the question: how did you and Adrian come up with Anxiety at Work? What inspired you to write it?
Great question. And we get asked that often, as you might guess. It wasn't really our idea. It was Adrian's son, Anthony Gostick. He came to us, and we've used Anthony, super smart kid, classic millennial, very digital, and very anxious at the same time. And he came to us and said, you guys do all this research on great workplaces and culture and leadership and teams. Do you ever talk about mental health? And well, Adrian is a classic Gen Xer, and I'm tail end of the baby boomers. And we kind of looked at him and went, no, why would you talk about that? Our generation was very much that you just sucked it up, rub some dirt on it, get back in the game, turn that frown upside down, and so we were a little dismissive. And he said, listen, you don't understand. You guys never talk about this. You oldies, which we appreciated that title as well. You oldies don't talk about it. But my generation, we start every conversation with, how are you doing? And what we mean by that is, how are you managing your anxiety? How are you managing your mental health? So it took us a bit by surprise. We said, well, okay, a challenge accepted. Let's take a look at the data and see what happens. And one of the really surprising things that came out of this, Chris, was how prevalent it was. That if it wasn't the number one issue with younger generation hires, new hires, and has migrated into older generations as well. If it wasn't the number one issue in HR or in managing your people, it was 1A. And the numbers were shocking. And we're going to get into a lot more of that later. But the one thing that really popped out to us, and why we're so delighted to be on the SOAR platform, is that 90% of employees were afraid to talk about it in the workplace. And I'm going to throw a question out to you, Chris. Why do you think that is? Why are people so afraid to talk about mental health? We can talk about physical health all the time. I break my leg, no problem, right? Why do you think 90% of employees won't talk to their managers about mental health?
I would say because they worry that it will impact their job. It'll impact their ability to keep and be effective in their job.
Absolutely spot on. There's a stigma, right, around mental health, that if I've got a physical problem, I get PT, I take time, I come back. Mental health is seen as a weakness. I told you this was a high stress job. You're telling me you can't handle it now? And they're afraid that it will impact their ability to get promoted, to get the next raise, to maybe get the good assignments. And because of that, they hold back, which of course is the worst thing you can do with anxiety, is to go off by yourself and go down those rabbit holes. So that one discovery alone really incentivized us to say, look, there are better ways to do this. There's a lot of information out there. We've got to normalize the conversation around this issue. And that led to us writing the book, Anxiety at Work.
Well, that's wonderful. As as my therapist can tell you, I'm someone who has dealt with a lot of anxiety in my life, and in fact, it has cost me in my jobs in the past. Cost me trust. It's cost me, self care. Frankly, taking the time and the effort that I needed to really take care of myself. What would you have told a younger me that was allowing their anxiety to impact the way that they were showing up at work?
Well, first off, it's interesting, right? The fact that you would even say in a public forum like this that you have a therapist is a
Mm.
generational leap, right? Because, we often thought, oh, if you've got to go for counseling, it must really be bad, right? Now it's almost like, what do you mean you don't have a therapist?
Mm.
Who don't, so if you don't, who are you talking to? Um, I would, you say, what would I have said to a young Chris Higby? What would I have said to a young Chester Elton? Would be to just be a little more trusting of the people around you. And let me illustrate that in a story. I've got a great friend, and by the way, I'm going to use his real name. He doesn't mind that I share this story. And it's somebody Chris from HR Leaders, right? Chris Rainey. And you talked about losing trust and losing faith in people in you. He has had severe anxiety his whole life and hid it really well. And the way that we hide that is we lie about it, right? He would say, oh, I'm not feeling well, or I'm going to leave this event early because my stomach's bothering me, or I've got a touch of the flu, or a thing has come up, right?
I've
And I've
used
got,
all
and
of those excuses.
right, you check every one of those boxes, right? And so what happened to Chris was he's a wonderful podcast for HR leaders. And he was talking to an HR leader about anxiety. And this leader was talking about his journey and now what his company's doing to support their employees and so on. Now, Chris would do this podcast in the middle of his team because they'd like to listen in and it was kind of a fun thing to do. Well, he gets so caught up in the conversation, he forgets where he is. And he says, I've suffered from anxiety my whole life. Now, his childhood friend is his business partner, never knew. His wife never knew. And here he is admitting in this public forum his anxiety. And then he goes, oh, where am I?
Ah,
And they wrapped up the podcast and he was terrified as to what his team would say. This is what we need to tell our younger selves and our current selves. Every one of his employees came up and said, Chris, that was so courageous. And by the way, me too.
mm,
I suffer from anxiety too. So, to our younger selves, I would say, we think we are unique in suffering from anxiety. We're absolutely not.
mm.
It's an absolutely normal human emotion. We all have suffered from anxiety, small or large at some point. And there isn't a person you'll meet. I love when I go to speak at conferences. Raise your hand if you've never been anxious at work, just so we know who the liars are in the room, right? And that you're not alone is one of the biggest messages that you can tell yourself now and your younger self. This is not unique. You are not defective. It's not just you. It's everywhere. Does that make
You
sense?
know, absolutely. It occurs to me that I of course wouldn't recommend this really, but another name for the book could have been Authenticity at Work, right? Um,
Yeah. Or
and
truth,
truth,
your own
exactly.
truth and being vulnerable and being honest. I
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I've noticed for sure as I've been able to feel more comfortable and confident talking about this because it has been really impactful in my life, but it's also been incredibly empowering to learn about it and to grow and to begin to be authentic in my workplace about this. And like you say, people that I've managed have been able to connect with me in much, much deeper ways because of that. So thank you for pointing that out. Um, what would you say is the most surprising finding from that you discovered as you were researching the book?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier, one of the things that was really surprising to me is the lack of trust between employees and managers when it comes to this issue. Not all issues, this issue in particular, that people were really terrified. The other surprising data point was the generational differences.
Mm.
We found that in our research that 50% of millennials and 75% of Gen Z said they had left a job due to a mental health issue. So you take a deeper dive in that and say, so why are you leaving? Trust was number one. I don't trust my manager to keep it to herself or himself, that it might become fodder for water cooler talk or, a private string on Slack. So that lack of trust and the fact that it was easier to quit a job and find a new job than it was to address it in your current workplace.
Mm.
It doesn't speak well of our workplace culture.
So let's just drill in a little bit on that last point. Um, Talk a little bit more about why you think that happens inside of workplaces.
Well, I think, we were chatting in our little practice session that a lot of leaders, a lot of senior leaders remember pre-internet, right? We're
Yeah.
the troglodytes or whatever. We remember when phones used to be connected to walls and you had to put a quarter in to make a call at an airport, right? Now it's so much different. There's so much information. We get bombarded by millions of little data points every day. And the social aspect of that has changed dramatically. I mean, you and I can find out so much about someone in just a few minutes and going to their LinkedIn profile or their Facebook profile or what are they posting on Instagram. And there's a lot of pressure to live this perfect digital life, right? Everything I post is this amazing vacation I took, my incredible children that speak 4 languages and have already, opened their own business and sold it. And by the way, they're 12 years old. Right? It's just insane, right? This pressure to keep up with this perfect digital life, it is more weight and more taxing than we can imagine, right? That everything I post is amazing. So when someone posts something that isn't amazing, you go, oh, like, was that courageous or was that stupid?
Mm.
You know? And so there's this ongoing pressure that my career is going great. My relationships are great. My children are amazing. My homes are amazing. I've got a Tesla, whatever, right? We're posting all this stuff. And that authenticity, where in your quiet time, you step back and say, I'm not sleeping. I'm worried about my kids. I'm worried about my company. I'm worried about my job. You know, I'm worried that, I have friends that had phenomenal jobs and went and bought magnificent homes and for crazy reasons lost that job and can't pay their mortgage. And you kind of go, you went from being this incredible story to being a disaster. And rather than reach out and ask for help, we come in and we go, I'm a failure. And we go down that rabbit hole, and we've all done it, right?
Yeah.
Where you lay awake at night and thinking, well, this is it. It's over. Right?
So
And these are people, by the way, in their mid-20s and mid-30s. And you go,
yeah.
You're going to live to be 90. Pace yourself,
Mm.
you know?
Okay, so to that point, what would you say one is a strategy that any individual could do? And of course, they should read your book to learn more about this. But what's one strategy an individual can do to reduce anxiety at work? And what is one strategy that a leader can do to create an environment where people can be more authentic about their mental health?
Yeah, two great questions. And the first question is just surround yourself with really good people. You may have, for example, I have 630,000 followers on LinkedIn. How many of those people do I know? I don't know, 20? I mean, it's fun that we have these conversations, but that's not my tribe, right? surround yourself with people that love you and that you trust, right? Whether it's a spouse, a family member, a teacher, a coach, a mentor, and make sure that you keep adding to that tribe.
Mm.
Often as we get older, we go, I've got enough friends. I'm good. Don't. Continue to be curious. Continue to put yourself out there and surround yourself with good, honest, helpful people. And understand something, that 99% of the people in your life, they are cheering for you. And I love this concept. We think, oh, they don't have time for me. Or, oh, by the way, they do, and they will make time, and they're cheering for you, and they want you to be happy, and they want you to be successful. So build a great tribe of trust.
Mm.
Now, as managers, which is the excellent question, right? So, okay, so if I know this is out there, how do I make it safe? How do I reduce anxiety? The number one cause of anxiety in the workplace is uncertainty. So I'm not really sure what's going on. Most employees will say, I don't really get all that much one-on-one time with my leader. I don't really get a lot of information at my level as to what's going on. So as a leader, if you can make sure that your team knows the answer to these 4 questions, it reduces anxiety. One is, how is the company doing? Right? How are we doing? Secondly, where are we going as a company? Are there mergers and acquisitions? Are we going to open new markets? Are we going to offer new products and services? So the health of the company and the direction of the company goes a long way to tamping down anxiety. Unless that information is, we're going broke, everybody's going to lose their job. In which case, by the way, that's not a bad thing to know either, right? At least I know. And I'm not thinking everything's great, and then all of a sudden I come to work and the doors are padlocked, right?
Right.
So how is the company doing, and where's it going? The next 2 are personal. How am I doing, right? Feedback is a gift, right? Are you coaching them up? How am I doing as an employee? And then the big question, what's my future here? Number one reason from the Hay Group that younger employees are leaving companies and replacing pay, by the way, pay was always number one, right? I'm leaving for more money. Easy to say, even if it's not true, right? I'm leaving because I hate my boss, but I'm going to tell people I'm leaving for more money. The ruse, the bait and switch. But number one reason for younger people leaving their jobs isn't money anymore. It's lack of growth. So taking time as a manager to map out your career path really is a big anxiety reducer. And by the way, again, a generational difference. My generation we climbed the corporate ladder. If you weren't moving up, if you were stuck, that was bad. Obviously, if you got demoted, that was the end of your career. But it was always, we had to be moving up and up and up and up and up. The new career path is more like climbing a rock wall. It's up and it might be over. And why? Because I want to develop some skills. I want exposure. I'm in sales, but I've always been really interested in marketing. Or I'm in marketing and I've always been interested in product development. It might be a lateral move on the wall, but a forward move in my personal development. And I'll give you a perfect example. My son, Garrett, video production, graduates from university, gets an internship, they hire him, small company, love the people he worked with, love the work he was doing. He was interested in more animation and other things like that. And he said, my company just wasn't big enough. And there was no one in the company to mentor me to get me there. So he did the classic. He went on to LinkedIn. He found companies in an area of the country he wanted to work in, where he had friends and family. He found the company that he liked. He went and found the graduates from his university that worked at that company. He connected with them, sent in his portfolio. And Chris, in 3 weeks, he had a job offer and a moving stipend, and he was on the road.
That's
I
awesome.
mean, it's phenomenal, right? And
Yeah.
even though it was for maybe a little more money, it wasn't the money that was the motivation. It was the opportunity. So, quick recap: leaders, reduce, the ambiguity at work, the uncertainty, and spend some time career pathing with your people. And anxiety work. Those 2 things alone, tremendous drop in anxiety with your people.
It occurs to me, there's a terrific book that you might also be familiar with, that is not a business book. by a philosopher therapist by the name of Tara Brach, Radical Acceptance, and it's a book about mindfulness. And she talks about two concepts, curiosity and awareness, as sort of being the two wings of mindfulness. And you mentioned the word curiosity, and I know mindfulness is actually a very important part of your book and the concepts that you teach. You talked about curiosity. You even that example of your son using some curiosity and sort of leaning into his curiosity to make a career change. Talk to me a little bit about that from, where, how does curiosity and awareness, how do those two elements fit into making for not just a less anxious workplace, but also a good leader?
Yeah, great question. I think the best leaders are just the most curious. They're always looking for, and by the way, I think it's really important to be curious away from work. I love history. When I listen to audible books on long drives and stuff, it's usually something about the presidents or wars or the rumors of wars, right? Or right now, I'm listening to a fascinating book on the Civil War and Lincoln and that whole thing. Um, the reason I think that's so important for leaders is there are always lessons to be learned. And, previous workplace, we would benchmark our companies against companies in our industry. One of the biggest breakthroughs in benchmarking was I don't want to benchmark against companies just in my industry. I want to benchmark my company against best in class companies. If I'm in oil and gas, that might be benchmarking myself against Chick-fil-A because of the way that they create an environment of growth and service and so on. So this idea of staying curious, it keeps your mind sharp. And to me, not only does it do that, it keeps your mind. Sometimes the worst thing that can happen for us for our mental health is this downtime where we spend way too much time with ourselves, right? And, like if I were to ask you, Chris, in your lifetime, who has been by far in your life your harshest and biggest critic?
This guy.
Absolutely. And when you talk about mindfulness, we have a wonderful little podcast called Anxiety at Work. It's free. You can find it everywhere. And we've had wonderful guests, business leaders, HR professionals, and a lot of therapists and people have written on the subject, right? One of my biggest takeaways was when we had a woman on our podcast and said, your inner voice is the one that you need to make, wait for it, your best friend. And I thought that was such a great concept. Again, this mindfulness piece. Be mindful of the way you talk to yourself because we are our harshest critics. And she gave this example that really rang home with me. She said, the words that you use to criticize yourself, would you ever say that to someone that you cared about? Would you ever use those words? Would you ever use those words with your wife or your kids or your best friend? The answer is always no. I would never say something that hurtful. And she said, well, then why would you say it to yourself? So when you get into that space where you don't have that curiosity, you're not engaged, maybe you're tired, you're run down, you've had some bad relationship, conversations or whatever, and we go down that rabbit hole. She says, stop and say, in this moment, what would your best friend say to you? And your best friend would say, what? You know what, Chris, are you kidding? You're great.
Mhm.
What do you mean you're not up to this? What do you
Right.
mean you're a failure? Look at all the wonderful things you've done. Look at your great kids. Look at the difference you're making in the world.
Or
Stop.
yeah. Or even well, of course you feel that way. You've been successful in the past and you're worried about failing on this or whatever it is, right? It's it is that authenticity. What's so interesting, and to be a little bit vulnerable here on a personal level, one of the things that I've learned, Chester, as I started going to therapy now, 6 years ago, as I started really beginning to do some work on myself and understand how to try to implement some of these methodologies in my life, I learned that I did not know how to be very introspective on a personal level. I did not know how to really have that conversation with myself without judgment and with, curiosity. Um, uh, Talk to me a little bit about that from a workplace perspective. How is that mindset changing our workplaces and even our style of work?
Yeah, and I love this question because I was challenged by a good friend of mine some years ago. He said, be a student of leadership. Like, don't just read about it and don't just interview people. Be a student of leadership. Like, study what makes a good leader. And when you look in the evolution of leadership, um, initially very much command and control. I mean, I remember when I got my first job, um, my leaders were just on pedestals. I mean, they were brilliant, they were smart, they were never wrong. Why? Well, because they were leaders. Like, they had the title. You know, we didn't. When they said jump, we said how high. We never said why, right? And then it evolved where it was more collaborative, and we would talk about leaders as team leaders, right? Now it's so interesting. And by the way, a good move, right? A good move. People felt heard. You'd ideate. It was more collaborative. Now, what I'm finding is that the best leaders are mentors, coaches, and teachers. Now, back to our personal development. I ask people all the time, who had the most impact on you in your personal development over and above family? Because, right, you can always say, look, it was my mom, it was my dad, it was my grandma, whoever raised me. Right? Over and above family, who had the biggest impact on your life? It's always there was a teacher, there was a coach, there was somebody that took me under his or her wing and mentored me. And that's what people are looking for in the workplace. We did a conference a few years ago, and the question for all these consultants was, what do you expect from your leader? And one of the most insightful answers that I've never forgotten was, I raised his hand, he says, I don't want my manager, my leader, to just make me a better worker bee. I want my leader to help me become a better person. That's a radical change from you walk in the door, you leave your personal life behind. We're selling widgets. We call it work for a reason. Buckle down, check the box, get it done. And when you close the door, I don't want to see it till tomorrow. To now, it's like, what do? We invite the whole person into the workplace. Okay, great. If we're going to do that, how are we developing the whole person? And back to that career pathing. By the way, your career path may be you need to leave because we don't do that here. I had a good friend who said, look, in sports, and he said, I would ask my people, where do you want to be in 5 years? He says, I was leading the Philadelphia 76ers NBA team. And my marketing person said, I want to be the head marketing director for a Major League Baseball team. And he said, immediately, it wasn't lost on me that we're not a baseball team. But what did he say? He said, I'll tell you what, the guys from the Philadelphia Phillies come here all the time. And I will introduce you to those guys so that you've got contacts in Major League Baseball. And I will do that for you as long as you give me your best every day. So it was a contract, right? You give me your best, I will do everything I can to help you realize your dream, which is to be in Major League Baseball. The funny one is, he said, I asked that to another one of my team, and she said, oh, in 5 years, I want to be on the moon. And he goes, that kind of took me a little bit by surprise. He said there was only one appropriate answer, and it was, let's see how we can help you get there. Who doesn't want to work for that guy?
Yeah.
Are you going to show up and give your best to somebody's going to help you land on the moon in 5 years, whether it happens or not?
Yeah.
Because they've got your best interest in heart.
Kind
of cool, isn't it? That evolution.
Yeah, it is really cool, and it actually reminds me of a town hall meeting that I was in some years ago, and I was with a company that, the values were amazing, like incredibly well written and thought out, and they really were. Much of it was about how to bring the whole person to work with you. Well, in this town hall, a young, Gen Zer jumped up and asked a really, really uncomfortable, difficult question of the CEO. And the CEO got very flustered, very frustrated by it. And that became the topic around the water cooler for the next week. And but you know, here we are asking people to come with their whole selves, and when they come with their whole selves, including their anxieties, we're not equipped to handle that very well as leaders. Talk to us a little bit about how leaders can deal with those more difficult aspects of anxiety at work.
Yeah, a great example, right? I've got all these values. I help write them. I'm on stage, and then you ask me a tough question. I go, "Ah, come on!"
Yeah.
Yeah, give me the first thing that I we do a lot of executive coaching. I say, whatever feedback you get, there's only ever one answer to that, and it's thank you. And the reason you want to do that is A, you don't want to stifle anyone's creativity or make feel like their question was not valid, right? Or heard. It also gives you just that moment to collect yourself, right? That says, I love the concept of the power of the pause. And I take a minute and I go, thank you very much for that question. That wasn't easy to ask.
Mm.
So let's take a minute and let's explore that for just a minute. What are the real concerns here? Now, that response, the conversation out of the water cooler would have been 180 degrees different, right? Didn't you love the way he handled that or she handled that, right? Took a minute, thought it through, that pause. And then you always express gratitude, right? Thank you. That couldn't have been easy for you to ask that question. And let's talk it through. And by the way, if I don't give you a good enough answer, you've got my number. Let's take it offline. But as we
Mm.
talk through, now, again, that response, is that a command and control response? No. Is that a team leader response? No. That's a teacher. That's a mentor, right? That's a coach. And that's what people are looking for. They're looking for the conversation. They're looking to be heard. And coach me up, coach me up. So, that evolution of leadership is really interesting. And I also, one of my favorite things to coach executives on is that words matter.
Mm.
Words matter. Be very careful and don't let your emotions get the best of you. I love the expression righteous indignation. that's a horrible place to be. Indignation is never good, right? Even if it's righteous, right? Well, he was within his right to react that way. I go, no, he wasn't. No, he wasn't. And the great Buddha gives, I had a friend who says, if you ever want a great new idea, read an old book, right? Because these truths are forever, right? He
Mhm.
says, Buddha admonishes us that every word that passes through our mouths should go through three doors. The first door is it true? The second door, is it necessary? Right? Because a lot of times I have a relative who says, well, I'm going to speak my truth, which means I'm going to really insult you right now. I go, it may be true. Is it necessary? Right? And the third one is it kind? You talk about the evolution of leaders and reducing anxiety. Never underestimate the power of kindness and giving
No.
people a little grace and assuming positive intent. Is
Yeah,
it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind?
I love that. Thank you. That's a great response to that. It reminds me of the quote by Viktor Frankl that between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. Um, and then I want to move on to the technology here in a minute, but I want to
Sure.
just touch on this a little bit because I know as a leader I have struggled with this where something difficult has happened and I don't give myself or my team the space to be able to process that before we start, digging in on it or getting upset about it or whatever. Like that CEO in the town hall, um, rather than taking the space, the pause, like you suggest, like you say or suggest, um, that his own anxiety came into play, right? I mean, that's really the reality of it. How do we as leaders develop that ability to take a half a second, to give ourselves a little breathing room between the stimulus and the response.
It's not easy because we want to react. Particularly as leaders, we want to have the right answer. And many times we do. And we're eager to give it to you right away, right away. So again, back to that power of the pause. It's a discipline that says, take a beat. What do we tell our kids when they're little, when something happens and they get really upset? We say, count to 10, count to 10. I mentioned to you, I'm listening to this book of Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln would write scathing letters and never mail them. He'd write it and then he'd sit on it.
Mm.
You know, we think with our texting and with our emails and everything that we have to respond immediately. No, you don't. No, you don't. You know, I mean, there are some ones or deadlines, right? I mean, you know, your passcode, they only give you 5 minutes. I get that. But in relationships, it can wait. It can wait. And never underestimate the power of sleeping on it or running it by a trusted advisor. I remember I avoided a horrible situation in my personal life with a scathing letter I had written to a dear friend of mine who offended me. And I wrote it and I felt good about it. And it was brilliant. It was a masterpiece. And then I read it to my wife and I said, what do you think? She goes, don't you dare mail that letter. What are you, nuts? He's one of your best friends. Do you want to ruin this relationship? Because once those words are out there, yes, you can apologize and yes, you can be forgiving. It's still out there. So it's a discipline. You know, just tell yourself, look, I'm going to go through my emails and I may write the response, but I'm not going to hit send until I get maybe a little more information, until I just let myself calm down a little bit and let me reread it. And like anything, look, a student of leadership, right? If you're going to be a student and you're going to learn, then you have to apply. And the application is, don't be reactive. Be proactive. And one of the ways that you're proactive is give yourself space and time to make sure that's the response you want to send.
That's awesome. And that frankly actually answers to some degree my next question of how is technology contributing to anxiety in the workplace? You know, you're right.
Yeah.
Email, text, you know, Slack, instant messengers, all of them sort of imply that everything needs to happen at the, you know, speed of sound. And taking the time to pause, particularly around technology, can play a pretty major role. What other ways do you see technology playing a role or impacting anxiety at work, either from a negative or a positive perspective that we haven't talked about yet?
Yeah, I think there's always a positive and a negative aspect, right? The positive with technology is, man, you can do research so quickly. And with AI, you know, you can just put a question in and be bombarded. And that's kind of the negative. How do you sift it all out? How do you put it in context? One of the things that I think is going to evolve, and the SOAR is a part of this, is how do we take all that data and make it meaningful, right? In the SOAR platform, what I love about it is, you know, Otter AI is a great tool, right? I put it into my video chat or whatever we're doing, and then it tells me everything everybody said, because I can't write that fast. I'm not going to remember everything. It's great. What I love about where AI is going and what SOAR does so beautifully is it doesn't just give me the information, what everybody said. It helps coach me up as to how did I make that a safe place to talk about anxiety? How did I make that a safe place to ideate? How did I make sure that everybody's voice was heard? How did I make sure that, you know, one of the things I love about Otter AI is it would say, by the way, you spoke 90% of the time. You know, that was always the one you go, ah. But that data point is great. What I love about SOAR is it'll coach up, try this and this and this. Next time, try this and this and this. So not just you spoke 90% of the time, here's a way for you to get other people involved. And it gives you a rating and a little score. And we're all competitive. We want to go from red to green. You know, so nobody wants to say perfect score, red right across the board, you know. And so the downside is there's so much information. The upside is what technology can now do with that information to coach us up to be better leaders, and the ripple effect, be better friends, parents, spouses, friends.
Yeah. Terrific. Thank you. With that, I wanted to just share with everyone on the webinar what the Workplace AI Scribe from SOAR looks like. Again, very similar to what you talked about with Otter or Gong or other solutions that are kind of in that same vein, where it's giving me a summary of a call, the participant state, the what we call the call mechanics. Apparently, I need to learn to monologue less, but I'm doing all right if I look at that. And by the way, that alone is terrific coaching for me, right?
Right.
I obviously the meeting has been recorded, it's been summarized, there's a full transcript that's easily searchable. But what you're talking about are these coaching insights. And
Yes.
and this is the anxiety at work coaching module within Scribe. And if when you purchase this or utilize it in your organization, if your organization has purchased it, it's very easy for you to just come back to this, that it gives you an overview, how it works, what the book covers and talks about, how the AI helps you as well. But one of the things that we did when we built this with you, Chester, was uh, to show it in terms of developmental stages. For instance, I'm a seedling, because a carrot, the carrot is your mascot. And
Right.
I want to talk about that here in just a second as to why. But so we went along kind of with this same metaphor that I'm at the seedling stage. I've begun to recognize and understand these concepts, but maybe I'm not as great yet at implementing them in my meetings, down to, hey, you're a master at this. You are harvesting, every day. You're doing, you're doing this exactly the way that you're intended to. Uh, and so you can also see over here on the right side, this is what that module shows you. It shows me both the different elements of the book that are touched upon through by the coach. So, for instance, leadership in uncertainty. So, this is a meeting where I was meeting with my team internally to talk about the status of some projects. And so, one thing that it does, and by the way, this is very personalized. The people that were in this meeting, Brent, for instance, got his own version of this as well. That is personalized just to Brent and his the way he showed up in the meeting. But this one is showing how I showed up in the meeting. So it's giving me some feedback that when I provided some clear and concise updates on a current project, that helped reduce confusion in workplace and anxiety. It gives me maybe some suggestions here as well. So we were talking about some pretty technical details with some less technical people. So it's saying, hey, just simplify some of those details. So it's not, they're not having to walk away from that going, crap, I don't know anything about this technology. Um, Impact on anxiety. So just some recommendations on just reminding me bite-sized nuggets, nothing that is forcing me to go down some, giant rabbit hole, right? Um, so that's essentially how the system works. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, Chester. But the first thing I want to ask you is tell us about the carrots. Tell us why.
Yeah. So Adrian Gostick, my co-author, and I, we've written 15 books together now, all about culture, leadership teams, mental health. What was really interesting to us is that the common thread to every great culture, team, and leader was gratitude. Our first, I think our first 6 books all had carrot in the title. The old Aesop's fable: you get more with carrots than you do with sticks. And so you're right. Our mascot is Garrett the carrot that we use in conferences and whatnot. And it's a fun plush toy for your kids, your desk, or your pet, right? And so this idea of that, we talked about it. You get feedback. The response is thank you. In the 8 strategies, you can see at the bottom there, after creating connections, surrounding yourself with good people, is be grateful. That was another great aha that we had in the research, that you can't hold 2 emotions at the same time. You can't be in a state of gratitude and in a state of anxiety. So what are some tokens and rituals that you put in place? this power of the pause, taking time at the beginning of the day and the end of the day to just write down things you're grateful for. I have a little gratitude tradition. I keep a little gratitude stone in my pocket just to remind me that even in the worst of times, I have people that love me, that are cheering for me. I live in a safe country. I'm surrounded by nature and beauty. And so those things. So yeah, we encapsulate it all in the carrot. And we always say you can never have too many carrots. And in my case, you can never wear too much orange, which is the color of most carrots.
So, Chester, when you saw this, uh, I've worked actually with Chester to help him to implement this and get this put together. Chester, when you saw this for the first time, what wheels got churning for you about how this is going to be effective and more effective or more helpful in helping people to reduce anxiety in the workplace?
Yeah, well, so over and above the graphics, which I love, is that, you know, you talked about earlier about what would you say to my younger self? Um, if I look back at my career, the thing that would have helped me by far the most would have been to have really candid, honest, mentoring, teaching feedback. I didn't have it. It was OJT, we used to call it, right? On the job training. They throw you in the deep end and you swam or you sank. What I love about, Scribe is that in a very safe environment, right? Like this is for me. This isn't getting published on the Slack channel. And it's telling me, yeah, I probably did talk too long. Okay, but how do I then mitigate that? Now, I think there's always going to be a place, at least I hope, for human interaction, that I'm going to have that mentor, that in-depth emotional conversation. In lieu of that, think of what this can do for me. I'm an executive coach. Most people cannot afford me as their executive coach. Everybody can afford this. And man, if I'd have had this in my 20s, in my 30s, even in my 40s, it would have made me such a better leader. And it would have made me such a better person. I would have been a better listener. I would have been a better collaborator. You look at those strategies on the right-hand side there, dealing with and overcoming perfectionism. Man, I wish I had somebody talk to me about that. Somebody that could have just said, hey, by the way, nobody bats 1,000. I know you think you should. Nobody bats 1,000. You're going to fail and it's going to be okay as long as you learn from your failures. Don't hide them, embrace them. That's the kind of stuff that you get with Scribe on a very personal, like you said, it's customized to you. This isn't like, this is what goes out to everybody after a conversation. This is what goes out to you and your journey in creating a better workplace, becoming a better leader. I mean,
Yeah.
think about this. 5 years ago, you would have never imagined that something like this would have been possible. And
Yeah,
yet here it is.
I love it. It's honestly what brought me to SOAR when I saw this, the initial kind of beta version of this some time ago. I actually am an investor in SOAR and have been from the very early days. And I've known Paul for many years. He and I worked together. I was one of his early product managers at Ancestry. Um, but we haven't worked together since then. That was 20 something years ago. But we've tried to work together multiple times. And this was one of the things that made me go, you know what? There's really something here and something special. And this, by the way, is just the beginning. There are many new features as the product guy that I would love to sit here and talk about for another hour, but that are coming down the road. But it is a unique perspective, and to have partners like you working with us here, I like to call it Chester Elton on my shoulder, right? It's
Yes.
I get to have you walking around with me, and when I need to dip into this and get a little bit of perspective from you, I can do that. And to those who are looking at this, going, wait a minute, this makes me anxious, right? To have this out there. You're right. This is only for you. This is not. You can make it available to a leader, and in fact, it can be an incredibly powerful tool for 360s or for one-on-ones, to review some of those types of things. But that is something that we give you full ownership of your data and your information here, so that regardless of where it's being used or how it's being used, you're the one who decides how you want to share it. And that's a really important aspect. Obviously technology can be an anxiety inducer in that way if we're not careful, right?
Absolutely. I like when you said on my shoulder. We've talked about, oh, you've got a coach in your pocket. I love that, the on your shoulder. I mentioned I'm listening to this wonderful book about Abraham Lincoln. In his inaugural speech, he talked about our better angels. And whenever we think of somebody on your shoulder, we got the angel and we got the devil, right? Well, the source
Better.
scribe is the angel. Yeah, go to your better angel,
Yeah.
and look at it as an opportunity to continue to be curious, continue to learn, to grow and develop in a very safe environment. Like you said, this is yours. Should you choose to share it, that's your decision. This is your coach. What would Chris Higby tell me? What would Chester Elton tell me? You've got some wonderful thought leaders on this platform, and now you've got access to them without having to pay, an exorbitant fee, which we all charge as executive coaches. You've got it right there, and
Mhm.
you can plumb that. You can study it. This is your roadmap to being a better leader and to being a better person. It's remarkable.
Well, and there actually is some secret sauce behind this. It looks pretty simple here, but there's some pretty complex things going on behind the scenes to
Oh yeah.
create. So I want to ask you a little bit of a futurist, the Chester Elton, the futurist question. If you could just pull an AI solution out of your hat that could be beneficial or helpful for individuals or teams in the workplace, that might work in conjunction this with Scribe, or might be something completely different. Are there any ideas? And I reserve the right, by the way, to keep it and use it in SourceGrad.
Yeah, I envision as Scribe evolves that not only will I have this report, but when the call is over, I'll be like, you say, "Hey Siri," right? You'd say, "Hey Scribe, how did I do?" And you'd have a conversation, and the conversation would be with Chester Elton. Say, "Hey, how did I do on tamping down my perfectionism there? How did I do on making sure that I didn't overload my team?" And yeah, I'm going to have, I love Scribe because I'm a paper and pen guy, but we've got that digitally. But eventually you'd be able to have a conversation and say, "How to do?" And say, "You know what? You're doing great." Or "You're doing great. There was this one moment when you probably could have addressed that a little differently." And by the way, as we wrap up, can you imagine having the conversation with Source Scribe and say, "By the way, just remember when you wrap up, just remember to say thank you. Remember to thank everybody for taking the time to be on." And you go, "Oh yeah,
I
okay,
love,
got it, got it."
I
Wouldn't that be
love that.
amazing?
I love that. Yeah, that's what's really fun about any of this, right? Is that we create something, we put it out in the marketplace, and if we are humble as product developers and as subject matter experts like yourself, we learn from that, right? We don't just put it out there and say, well, this was perfect when I gave it to you. Why are you giving me feedback? No, we want
Right.
that, right? We want that feedback. We want um, for this to grow and become even more impactful and effective, and the ability to, in fact, you may know this, that SOAR, one of our iterations as a company, was as an Alexa tool for sales coaching. And so audio processing, particularly as it relates to AI, is actually quite a huge part of what we are doing for the future here at SOAR. And I think you'll see something like that coming up, Chester. So
Yeah, and the whole idea is growth and development, right? Curiosity, keep moving forward. There's always going to be new innovations. There's going to be new things that come into place, and embrace that. I love the expression that the masterpiece is in the mess. You know,
mm,
And I encourage leaders as they embark on their leadership journey. And it's always a great reminder to myself. I go, look, um, there's ups and downs, there's successes and there's failures, and that's okay. It's okay. The masterpiece is in the mess. Sometimes it gets really messy before it gets really good. Um, I love the great masters, the great Dutch masters. And you look at their masterpieces. Well, you don't see all the ones they threw away, right? You just see the beautiful Matisse and the whatever. I guarantee you, a guy who I'm a big Beatles fan. He said, the Beatles wrote like 500 songs. They didn't publish all of them. Why? Because some of them just weren't very good. We think, oh,
Yeah,
the Beatles, it had to be great. No, I guarantee you, they wrote some songs that were crap, and that's okay. And that's
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, it actually reminds me of have you seen the Beatles documentary? I think it's called Get Back, that's on, I believe it's on the Disney Channel
It's on
or,
Apple, and then it was Disney Plus.
or
Yeah,
Apple. Okay, yeah, yeah.
all the
That's a
stuff that they
perfect
went through.
example, right? It's just like
Yeah,
5 hours or more than that. It's a fairly long series of them kind of being messy, right? Going through, getting upset, George leaving for a few days and finally coming back, and then you see them begin to put together, the song Get Back, and then that entire album that they ended up performing from the roof of Abbey Road. That's a great example of the beauty is in the mess. It reminds me also of that Rumi quote that the cracks are where the light gets in, right?
exactly,
It's like
exactly.
how can we embrace these things and learn from them and grow from them and see them as the valuable and powerful impact that they can be. And it makes me think, Chester, in wrapping up here, because we need to close up. We've talked about how this applies to business, right? Those quotes that I just shared actually apply more to, or are meant to apply more to the individual. You've been adamant about its application in people's personal lives, though, as well. And you told me about leaders that have brought up their children in college, where they've seen the anxiety there in their college experiences. Talk to us a little bit about how you see this applying to families and to society in general, just as a
Yeah,
final wrap.
yeah. Thank you for that, because I love to end every conversation we have about our books, whether it's gratitude or culture or anxiety, that we attack this from a business perspective. How do we make we spend a lot of time at work. It should be enjoyable, it should be invigorating, it should be engaging. The ripple effect, though, is that these apply to our personal lives. Do you think your kid's a little anxious on the first day of school? I guarantee you they are. Do you think they're worried about, when you move for your job, that they're at a new school, that they won't have any friends? Do you think they're worried about being bullied online or made fun of because their accent is a little different? Of course they do. And these principles all apply. One of the best things that happens to me when we speak at conferences, we'll do a book signing, and a guy will come up and say, "Hey, can I get an extra copy for my daughter? Can
Mm.
I get an extra copy for my teenage son? Because everything you talked about is happening in my house." And I go, "Absolutely." And I give him my card and I say, "Listen, Adrian and I wrote this book because we both had sons that went through extraordinary anxiety. And it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. And we made every mistake humanly possible as parents until we finally got it right. And if we can help alleviate that pain for you in your home and some of these principles, because it comes from a deep rooted, not only did we want to create better workplaces, we really, really, really wanted to help our boys. And that journey is sacred to us. And so when it comes out that, will this work with my daughter? Will this work with my son? The answer is absolutely. Don't miss the chance.
Well, Chester Elton, this has been a delight. Thank you so much for joining us on our workplace AI webinar today, and thank you all for joining us as well. This will be recorded and made available through LinkedIn and other sources down the road. If any of you have any questions or would like to talk to us about workplace AI or to talk to Chester, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. I think we've got contact information all over the place. You can obviously go directly to soar.com to contact us as well. Chester, have a wonderful day and a wonderful rest of your week. And thank you so much.